Tuesday. 8:12 a.m. Chicago. The conference room on the 17th floor smelled faintly of burned coffee and old air conditioning. Frosted glass blurred the hallway outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead just loud enough to make the silence worse. I sat at the far end of the table, alone for a few seconds. Long enough to know this wasn't going to be a meeting. Then the door opened. Michelle entered, first vice president of operations. Blazer too crisp, smile too flat. Behind her was Tom Winters, regional director. My direct boss. Blue shirt. No tie. Holding a sealed manila envelope like it might burn him. He didn't sit. Neither did she. Thanks for coming in early, Avery, Michelle said, voice light like we were about to talk budget forecasts. Tom placed the envelope in front of me. I didn't touch it. He cleared his throat. The company's undergoing structural changes. Unfortunately, that means your position has been eliminated, Michelle finished. She said it like she'd rehearsed. I looked at the envelope. My name was printed on the label. Typed. Not even handwritten. Neither of them met my eyes. I could have asked why. I could have listed the 12 years, the 2 emergency recoveries I led, the $14.6 million I saved them last fiscal year by overhauling the Midwest routing protocols. But I didn't. Instead, I listened. To the side. Michelle turned slightly toward Tom and said, in Korean, that's the last one. Copy her drive before she leaves. I blinked. Once. Tom nodded, replying just as casually, also in Korean, finally. No more legacy code to babysit. They said it like I didn't exist. Like I didn't understand. But I did. Every word. I'd been learning Korean for 5 years. Quietly. Between late-night audits and early morning meetings. Not for work. Not even for them. Just for myself. I never told anyone. Especially not them. I picked up the envelope. Slipped it into my bag without opening it. Anything else? I asked. Michelle hesitated, almost surprised I spoke. No. That's all. HR will reach out. I stood. Adjusted my blazer. Looked them both in the eye and then past them. To the glass. To the reflection. I'll collect my things now. As I turned to leave, Tom said one last thing in English, almost as an afterthought. We appreciate everything you've done. I stopped at the door. Not long. Just a pause. Then I left. No handshake, no argument. I walked past the receptionist, who didn't look up. Past the break room, where someone laughed too loudly about a weekend trip. My desk was already unlocked. Files boxed. Badge access revoked. Efficient. Cold. I didn't speak to anyone. Just picked up my things. A photo of my sister and I at Lake Geneva. A ceramic mug I'd gotten at a company retreat 6 years ago. A single flash drive. Not the one they knew about. The one they'd copied was clean. Sanitized months ago. The one in my hand? Different. As I stepped into the elevator, my reflection stared back at me from the chrome doors. Calm. Expressionless. But awake. They thought they'd removed a piece from the board. They hadn't realized I was never playing their game. Not really. Because by the time they fired me, the code they'd copied was already rotting from the inside. And I was already gone. They only remembered what I cost them. Not what I saved. I joined Halcyon Freight when it was still headquartered above a discount mattress store in Aurora. No parking. No windows. No idea what it would become. Back then, we had 5 employees. I was brought in as a systems coordinator, a title that meant nothing but did everything. I cleaned data, mapped delivery routes by hand, even wrote macros when our scheduling software broke every other week. We didn't have much. but we had trust. And momentum. I worked 12-hour days. Learned the bones of the business not from training manuals, but from truck drivers and warehouse staff. I asked questions no one else did. Like why certain delivery zones failed during peak months, or why our Midwest hub always had a 4 higher damage rate. I didn't fix things fast. I fixed them permanently. Tom Winters wasn't around then. Michelle didn't join until year 7. But I stayed. Because I believed in what we were building. Because every time something broke, they came to me. Not with panic but with respect. They forgot that part later. By year 4, I was managing a small team. Then a department. Then a cross-regional infrastructure upgrade. I implemented real-time tracking across 5 states. Cut delivery errors by 37 in less than 2 quarters. The CEO back then, Walter Dorsey, gave me a plaque. It said, "To the architect of our flow." I didn't display it. But I kept it. Bottom drawer, left side. Year 5, I noticed the company shifting. New investors, quarterly targets. Slide decks with buzzwords that never made it to the floor. Still, I kept my head down. Did the work. When Tom arrived, he was charming. Sleek. MBA from Dartmouth, with a handshake that felt too firm to be friendly. He asked questions, at first. Took notes when I explained the routing logic I'd spent years refining. Even called my system elegant. Then he stopped calling it anything. Stopped mentioning my name in meetings. Started rerouting approvals through Michelle. Michelle was harder to read. Polished. Quiet. Always aligned with the strongest voice in the room. Theirs began to replace mine. I was asked to mentor a new hire, an operations analyst from Seoul. She shadowed me for 2 months. Took screenshots. Asked about our legacy triggers and fallback procedures. When I asked why she needed that access, Michelle said just knowledge transfer. Best practices. I nodded. But I started logging things. Quietly. System access. Code changes. Internal memos. Nothing dramatic. Just patterns. A month before they fired me, I submitted a proposal. A full rewrite of our Northern Dispatch algorithm, one that could have saved us $2.1 million annually. It never got reviewed. Michelle said they were revisiting priorities. Tom didn't respond at all. I knew then. Not because of what they said. But because of what they didn't. I wasn't the only one being forgotten. 2 senior leads were let go within 3 months. One had been with the company for over a decade. His access was cut before he'd even cleared his desk. No announcement. No explanation. Just, gone. People started watching their backs. And stopped sharing ideas. They didn't see it as a system failure. But I did. I knew how erosion worked. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet. A slow decay of trust, until only silence remained. I told no one I was learning Korean. Not even my sister. It started as curiosity back when we partnered with a warehouse team in Incheon. I wanted to understand the late-night Slack messages. The phone calls I wasn't included in. The further I went, the clearer it became I wasn't just translating a language. I was decoding a hierarchy. One they thought I couldn't read. By the time Tom and Michelle started whispering in Korean during meetings, I could have responded in full. I didn't. Silence became my weapon. Observation, my advantage. Let them believe I was one step behind. That's how you survive long enough to choose the right moment to leave something broken. Or let it break itself. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted everything I'd built without paying for it. It started with a deleted comment. One of the junior analysts, a quiet kid named Jamie, had tagged me in a workflow thread about regional rerouting logic. I saw the notification. Then it disappeared. When I asked him about it later, he looked confused. I thought you were looped out of that project, he said, eyes flicking to the side. Michelle said you were transitioning focus. I hadn't heard the phrase, transitioning focus, before. But I'd heard enough lies in polished words to recognize a rebranding of exile. That night, I stayed late. The office was empty by 7:30 p.m. The lights dimmed on motion sensors. I turned them off entirely and worked by the glow of my monitor just like I used to when the company was 5 desks and 2 shared laptops. Only this time, I wasn't building. I was watching. First, I checked access logs. My personal folders had been cloned 3 times in the last 6 weeks, each time by accounts registered to our IT infrastructure team in Seoul. That wasn't part of any audit. Second, I pulled commit records. Our Korea-based analyst had been checking in adjusted versions of my proprietary warehouse scripts. Rewritten just enough to strip author tags. Some lines were rearranged. Others removed entirely. Logic I'd spent 6 years testing, now discarded like old packaging. Third, I found the real trail. A meeting invite marked a private, buried in a shared drive I hadn't used in months. The file name was innocuous Ops Review Sync Q3 Draft.pptx. Inside was a full systems migration plan. Move all legacy routing and dispatch protocols from my Midwest build to a standardized cloud-native model. Redesign the codebase using the globally aligned workflows. A familiar phrase caught my eye: minimize reliance on region-specific personnel. I knew exactly who that meant. The final slide had a timeline. Week 1 clone key infrastructure components. Week 2 migrate routing triggers. Week 3 decommission North American fallback layers. Week 4 personnel offboarding. My name was nowhere in the file. But I was all over the code they were copying. They didn't just want me replaced. They wanted me erased. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights flicker behind the blinds. Somewhere across the world, my system was being dismantled by people who didn't understand how it held together. Not out of malice. Just indifference. They didn't think they needed me anymore. Because they thought they had my work. What they didn't realize was that my system didn't just move packages, it protected itself. I'd designed it like a living organism. Flexible, adaptive. And defensive. Every time I'd been told no to budget increases, or documentation support, or junior training staff, I'd built something smarter. And more subtle. Years ago, I'd embedded a series of internal diagnostic checks invisible if you didn't know where to look. They watched for inconsistencies in load balancing, latency in zone distribution, and human error in override requests. If thresholds were breached even slightly, the system would flag itself. Not with alerts. But with delay logic. Minor holdups. Misrouted packages. Just enough friction to frustrate. And only I knew how to reset the timers. At the time, I'd called it a self-correction layer. Now, I saw it for what it really was. Insurance. The next morning, I added one final script. Buried 6 levels deep in our North American dispatch tree. Masked as a legacy debug function. It didn't delete anything. It didn't crash the system. It simply watched. If a specific file, routing core templative 3xlsx, was edited by an unauthorized user, the entire system would default to archive mode. Read only. No dispatches. No edits. No recovery without a manual unlock key. And that key? It wasn't stored anywhere. It was memorized. By me. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't hint at anything. I showed up to work each day, smiled politely in the elevator, answered questions during meetings where I was no longer consulted. When they spoke in Korean, I kept my face neutral. They believed I was fading quietly. But every day I stayed, I took one more step backward, not in retreat, but in removal. Extracting myself from the places they thought they controlled. Leaving just enough behind to make it look like they won. Then came the invitation. A calendar ping, forwarded by Michelle. Leadership Q4 Strategic Sync Tom Michelle W. Seoul HQ, no agenda. No context. No invite for me. I clicked decline. That evening, I began backing up my final documentation, the real one. The one I kept encrypted on a private drive since the day they first shut me out of a planning session. Inside it, my original algorithm's performance logs from the last 3 years, a list of every override they'd approved, and a complete translation log of every Korean conversation I'd overheard and understood. They didn't know what I knew. And I didn't plan to tell them. Not yet. They made plans behind closed doors. I built a door they couldn't see and walked out before it collapsed. On my last Friday before the firing, I walked into the office at 7:05 a.m. same as usual. Same mug. Same calm expression. They hadn't pulled the trigger yet, but everything in the air said they would. The silence was too deliberate. The smiles too brief. I wasn't waiting. I was finalizing. That morning, I scheduled a task on our internal server, Legacy Inventory Diagnostic Sweep. The name meant nothing. But the code behind it quietly ran a checksum validation across 14 critical automation scripts. If any of them were altered even by a single comma, the system would disable write access to the dispatch tier for that region. They would think it was a server glitch. They'd call IT. They wouldn't find anything. By noon, I submitted my final performance summary, a quarterly task that no one really read. This one was different. It included technical notes, embedded flags, a list of undocumented interdependencies between our regional nodes that only I knew existed. I left it in the shared archive. Not for them. For legal. If things escalated, I wanted my fingerprint on record quietly, properly. Just enough to prove that what came next wasn't sabotage. It was neglect. Theirs. That afternoon, I forwarded one document to my personal email. A legal policy. Internal. Confidential. Title, Contingency Framework for Systemic Code Migration North America Region. It was an old draft one I'd co-authored 3 years ago. It detailed fallback procedures if the routing system needed emergency rebuilding. At the time, the company refused to fund it. Now they were trying to rebuild that exact structure without me, without budget, without blueprints. I didn't need to expose them. I just needed to wait. The last real thing I did that day was open a new Gmail account. Alias ashaw.ops.reviewgmail.com. I used a VPN. Burned the session. The next morning, I drafted a message. To whom it may concern, this is a courtesy note from a concerned former employee. Halcyon Freight's current systems restructuring in the North America region is proceeding without adherence to established safety and compliance protocols. Several layers of internal oversight have been bypassed. Some technical decisions may result in operational instability. I suggest the board initiate an internal audit within the next 30 days. Attached are preliminary notes. I will not be available for further comment. No threats. No accusations. No name. Just enough to make someone nervous. I attached 2 files, a scrubbed version of my routing audit, and a log of unauthorized server access from the Seoul team. Then I set the email to send on a delay. 10 days later. The Tuesday after my departure. That weekend, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky press down on the lake. My sister texted me, "You okay?" I typed just a transition. Then I muted the thread. I wasn't angry. I was already gone. On Monday, I entered my final code update. A null patch marked as Legacy Cleanup pushed through Git at 5:17 p.m. Inside, it contained a single redirect. If a specific variable region flag true was detected on any core file, it would begin a loop. Nothing malicious. Just delay. 3 seconds here. 4 seconds there. Enough to ripple through the system by end of week. It wouldn't crash. It would choke. And they wouldn't know why. On my last day, Tuesday, Tom passed me in the hallway. "Big plans?" he asked. His tone too casual. I smiled. "Rest, mostly." Michelle stopped by my desk an hour later with a forced smile. "We're sorry to see you go. Your leadership will be missed." I nodded. I'm sure it'll all run smoothly. She laughed like she believed it. They still thought I'd walked away empty. At 4:59 p.m., I placed a flash drive in my bag. Encrypted. Air-gapped. Containing the full North America architecture, 3 unreleased diagnostics tools, internal emails showing attempts to bypass QA, a private log of Korean conversations translated into English, word for word. At 5:01 p.m., I dropped my badge on Michelle's desk. You'll need to cancel that access, I said softly. She blinked. Oh. Right. I walked to the elevator. No one clapped. No one looked. Just like they wanted. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 2 years re-architecting my life the same way I'd built their systems, layered, precise, and with multiple exits. By the time they removed me, I wasn't asking for anything. I wasn't applying. I'd already been offered something better by someone who watched from a distance. Someone who'd used the very tools I'd built to measure the collapse about to hit them. I left the building without a word. No emails. No goodbye drinks. No second looks. A ghost in flats and a gray coat. But in my silence, I left noise they couldn't trace. Noise they wouldn't hear until it was far too late. They thought I left quietly. They didn't realize the silence was a countdown. It started with a delay. Small. Innocuous. The kind you blame on traffic or server load. An East Coast dispatch failed to sync with warehouse confirmations in Pennsylvania. A 5-minute discrepancy in the routing table triggered a manual override. Nothing major. But then it happened again. And again. 3 different zones. Same lag. Same failure. They didn't understand why. I did. By the end of week 2, customer complaints tripled. Packages marked as delivered weren't arriving. Dispatch trucks were doubling back on loops they'd already completed. I knew the route because I designed it. My diagnostic script had quietly triggered read-only lockdown on several routing clusters. Each time the Seoul-based team attempted to fix the files, the delays deepened. Not permanently. Not dangerously. Just persistently. Enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to break trust. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. Jamie, the analyst who'd once tagged me in a deleted thread, sent me a LinkedIn message. Everything's falling apart. Michelle looks like she hasn't slept in a week. I left it unread. By week 3, Halcyon's largest client, a nationwide retailer, suspended new orders. Said they'd reassess fulfillment capacity before Q4. Translation: they were leaving. That client accounted for 18% of Halcyon's revenue stream. Tom must have felt it not in numbers, but in pressure. That's when the calls started. First it was Michelle. Blocked number. No voicemail. Then an email subject: hope you're well, a body, we were wondering if you'd be open to a short consulting call. No signature. No apology. On Friday, the real message arrived. Avery, I won't pretend this isn't serious. The system is misfiring in ways no one understands. The Korean team is saying your logic was too specific. We need your insight. I can authorize a full consulting package, your rate, your terms. Just help us get back on track. I read it twice. Then archived it. The following Monday, the board stepped in. That's when my scheduled email sent 10 days after I left landed in the inboxes of every board member with the subject, internal audit recommendation urgent. It wasn't from me, officially. Just an anonymous former employee. But it contained all the right phrasing. The kind legal can't ignore. The kind that says if you don't look now, you're liable later. By the end of week 4, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in a year. Elena Reed, former VP of Global Fulfillment. She'd left quietly 6 months before I did. No exit memo. No LinkedIn post. Her text said, they're imploding. I told you they'd learn the hard way. Also, my new COO wants to meet you. Interested? I smiled. Typed back one word, yes. On Wednesday morning, my doorbell rang. I knew who it would be. Tom Winters. Same blue shirt. Tie this time. Hair less precise. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Please, he said. Just 5 minutes. I leaned against the frame. What happened to the Korean system? I asked. He blinked. Excuse me? You replaced mine with theirs. How's that going? He looked away. They misunderstood certain interdependencies. Your logic wasn't fully documented. That's because documentation funding was denied. 3 times. I know. He exhaled. I made mistakes. But the board's willing to bring you back. Full reinstatement. Signing bonus. Title elevation. Anything you need. I didn't answer. He stepped closer. Avery, please. This wasn't personal. We just thought the system would run without you. I finally looked at him. It is running, I said. Exactly as I designed it. He paled. I closed the door. Slowly. Softly. That night, Michelle sent one last email. Whatever this is, whatever you did, you proved your point. Can we please talk? I replied. 1 sentence. You assumed I didn't understand the language. Then I blocked her. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't leak anything. I simply left them with what they thought they wanted. My systems. Without me. And now, they were learning the difference. I didn't burn the bridge. I just refused to cross it again. 2 months later, I was living in Portland. Different coast. Different pace. The new role wasn't glamorous, a senior advisor position at a growing logistics consultancy. No title politics. No corporate theater. Just work. And people who listened when I spoke. It felt clean. There was no welcome back banner, no redemption arc. Just a desk. And a team that valued what I knew before I became invisible. I didn't talk about Halcyon. Not because I was hiding. But because it was over. Some ruins don't need tours. One afternoon, as rain traced slow lines down my office window, I received a visitor. Jamie, the analyst from Chicago, had flown in for an interview. I met him in the lobby. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just tired. Your systems were the only reason anything worked, he said, before we even sat down. I said nothing. Just gestured to the coffee bar. He got the job. Michelle never contacted me again. Tom did. Once. A brief message through a professional mediator. The board would like to formally apologize. They acknowledge your contributions. There is a standing offer, any role, any scope. I didn't respond. Forgiveness doesn't always need to be said aloud. But returning? That was never an option. Halcyon's recovery would take months. They'd hired a third-party firm to restore the North American architecture at 4 times the cost they once refused to pay for proper documentation. Their largest client never came back. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. Justice, when it arrives quietly, is best observed from a distance. One evening, I had dinner with Elena, the former VP who'd referred me here. We sat in a corner booth of a quiet restaurant near the river. She raised her glass. To clean exits. I smiled. And to systems that speak louder than meetings. We clinked glasses. For the first time in years, I exhaled without measuring the room. Some nights, I still reviewed code. Not for them. For myself. I wasn't building something new, not yet. But I knew I would. And this time, I'd build it with the right people. The ones who ask questions. And don't flinch at the answers. The last box from Chicago arrived by mail in early spring. Inside a single item. The plaque from Walter Dorsey, the old CEO, to the architect of our flow. I set it on the shelf beside my new team's thank you card. It looked less like a relic now. More like a reminder that the ones who build quietly are also the ones who leave with everything that matters.